My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and I've learned that life saves its biggest surprises for when you think the story is almost over. I'd been married to my brother-in-law Robert for 43 years when he passed. Robert. Even now, saying his name brings a complicated mixture of feelings I'm still learning to understand. Let me start from the beginning, where all good stories should start. I met Robert when I was 28. He was my younger sister Carolyn's husband first. They'd been married 5 years when Carolyn died in a car accident. She was only 30, vibrant and full of life one moment, gone the next. The grief nearly destroyed both Robert and me. We were the two people who loved her most in this world. Robert had a 6-year-old son, James. That little boy was lost without his mother. I started helping with James, just being there, making sure he had clean clothes and warm meals. Robert was drowning in his own sorrow and couldn't see past it. Somewhere in all the darkness, Robert and I found each other. Not in a dramatic, sweeping romance kind of way. It was quieter than that. More like two people holding each other up in a storm, realizing they didn't want to let go when the weather cleared. We married the year after Carolyn died. Some family members whispered about it being too soon, about it being inappropriate, but grief doesn't follow a schedule, and neither does the human need for companionship. I raised James as my own. He never called me Mama. That name belonged to Carolina, but we had our own bond. I was there for scrap knees and school plays, for teenage heartbreaks and college applications. I loved that boy with everything I had. James grew up and married a woman named Lisa. She was smart, ambitious, always impeccably dressed. I tried to love her the way I loved James, but there was something I couldn't quite reach in her, a coldness behind her polite smiles. But James loved her, so I kept my observations to myself. That's what you do when you love someone. You let them make their own choices, even when your heart whispers warnings. Robert died 3 months ago, pancreatic cancer. It took him quickly, which was a mercy. He was 75, and we'd had a good life together. Not perfect, no life Isa, but good. We traveled, laughed, built a home filled with memories. Before he died, Robert told me about his will. He had property in 3 apartment buildings he'd invested in over the years, and a beach house we'd bought together 20 years ago. He told me it was all mine. His way of thanking me for giving him a second chance at happiness, for loving his son, for being his partner through everything. I hadn't married Robert for money. We'd both worked modest jobs. He was an accountant, I was a teacher, but he'd been smart with investments, careful and patient. Over the decades, those investments had grown into something substantial. The day I went to the notary to finalize everything, I felt Robert's presence with me. I could almost hear his gentle voice telling me to enjoy life, to travel, to spoil myself a little. At 72, I figured I'd earned it. I drove home that afternoon with my heart full of memories and plans. I wanted to tell James and Lisa in person, to share this moment with them, not to brag, but to let them know that Robert had also set up a trust for any future grandchildren, that he'd thought of their family too. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw James's car already there. My heart lifted. Maybe they'd stopped by for a visit. Those were becoming rarer as their lives got busier. I walked up to my front door and heard voices inside. The door wasn't locked. James had a key. Of course, he'd always been welcome in this house. I was about to call out when I heard Lisa's voice, sharp and clear. 3 apartments and a beach house. Can you believe that old woman is getting everything? I froze in my hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. Mom earned it. That was James, and hearing him defend me made my heart swell even as I stood there, hidden. Earned it? Lisa laughed, and there was no warmth in that sound. She married your father a year after your real mother died. You were 6, James. You barely remember Carolyn. Margaret saw an opportunity and took it. That's not fair. Mom took care of me. She loved Dad. She saw a grieving widower with a child and a stable job. She calculated her moves. And now, 43 years later, she gets the payout while we're stuck in our 2-bedroom condo, drowning in my student loans. The words hit me like physical blows. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. What do you want me to do? James sounded tired. This wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. I realized. Talk to her. Make her understand that those properties should go to blood family. You're Robert's son, his only child. She's not even really related to you. She's my mother. She's your father's second wife. There's a difference, James, and the sooner you see it, the better off we'll be. There was a long pause. I held my breath, waiting for James to defend me again, to tell Lisa she was wrong. Instead, I heard, "What I've broken bar what if we just talked to her about selling one of the apartment buildings? We could present it as helping us get into a better financial position. She'd want to help us, right?" My heart cracked. Not shattered and not yet but cracked. "That's a start," Lisa said. "But honestly, James, at her age, does she really need all that property? She should be thinking about her legacy, and her legacy is you." I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, very quietly, I backed out of my own house and closed the door silently behind me. I sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. 72 years old, and I was hiding from my own family, trying to process a betrayal I never saw coming. The next few weeks were strange. James and Lisa came over for Sunday dinner as usual. Lisa complimented my cooking. James hugged me goodbye, and all I could hear were their voices behind my door, talking about me like I was an obstacle rather than a person. I didn't confront them. Maybe I should have. Maybe a younger, fiercer version of myself would have. But at 72, after burying the man I'd loved for over 4 decades, I was tired. Instead, I thought. I remembered. I went through old photo albums and read old letters. I found a letter Carolyn had written to me a month before she died. In it, she'd made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd watch over James and Robert. "They'll need someone," she'd written in her looping handwriting. "They'll need love and steadiness. You're the strongest person I know, Maggie." Promise me. I'd kept that promise. For 43 years. I'd kept it. I also found letters from Robert, written during a business trip 5 years into our marriage. "Thank you for choosing us," he'd written. "Thank you for seeing past the grief to the family we could become. James told me yesterday that you make the best pancakes in the world. I think he's right, but also, you make everything better. You make life worth living again." I sat with these letters and remembered the truth of my life, not Lisa's cynical rewriting of it. Then I called my lawyer. "I want to make some changes to my will," I said. Over the next month, I made arrangements. I didn't act in anger. I'd learned long ago that decisions made in fury usually lead to regret. Instead, I acted with clarity. I set up a charitable foundation in Carolyn's name, focused on supporting children who'd lost parents. The 3 apartment buildings would fund it in perpetuity. The beach house would be sold, with proceeds going to the foundation. For James, I created a trust that would pay out $50,000 when he turned 55 years from now. The trust had one condition: he had to write me a letter, telling me what he'd learned about family in those 5 years. It wasn't revenge, exactly. It was consequence. And maybe, just maybe, it was a lesson. I also wrote letters, one to James, one to Lisa. I sealed them and left them with my lawyer, to be open after my death. In them, I told the truth about what I'd heard that day, and how it made me feel. But I also told them I forgave them, because I did. Anger is a heavy thing to carry at 72. 3 days after I finalized everything, James and Lisa came over for dinner. Lisa was particularly charming, complimenting my dress, bringing wine. Halfway through dessert, she brought it up. "Margaret, we wanted to talk to you about something. James and I have been thinking about our future, and we wondered if you'd ever considered selling one of the apartment buildings. We could help you manage it." And I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I appreciate your concern for my properties," I said calmly, "but I've actually just finished making arrangements for everything. It's all taken care of." James leaned forward. "What kind of arrangements, Mom?" I smiled at him, and I meant it. "Despite everything, I still love this man I'd raised, the kind that honor your father's memory and your mother Carolyn's legacy. That's all you need to know for now." Lisa's smile faltered. "But surely, as Robert's son, James should be involved in decisions about Robert made his decisions when he was alive," I said, my voice still gentle but firm. "And I've made mine. Now, Who wants more coffee? The evening ended early. Lisa claimed a headache. James kissed my cheek at the door, but I saw the worry in his eyes. That was 6 weeks ago. I'm telling you this story now because I've learned something important in my 7 decades on this earth. The truest measure of love isn't what you get, but what you give without expectation of return. I loved Carolyn, I loved Robert, I loved James. That love was real, regardless of what Lisa might think or what doubts James might have entertained. And here's the thing about real love: it doesn't diminish when it's not returned in the measure you hoped. It doesn't become less true because someone questions your motives. It simply is. I still see James. He comes over once a week now. Without Lisa, we don't talk about property or inheritances. We talk about his work, about memories of his father, about the weather and the neighbors and all the small things that make up a life. Sometimes, I catch him looking at me with a question in his eyes. Maybe he's wondering what I overheard. Maybe he's wondering what I've done with the properties. Maybe he's wondering if I know. I let him wonder, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons can only be learned in silence, in the space between what's said and what's left unsaid. Next spring, I'm planning to volunteer at the children's center that the foundation will support. I want to spend time with kids who are grieving, who are lost, who need someone to just show up and care. Because that's what I've always done best: showing up, caring, loving without keeping score. Life is long, if you're lucky, long enough to love deeply, to be hurt, to forgive, and to find purpose even in disappointment. I'm 72, and I'm still learning, still growing, still figuring out what kind of legacy I want to leave. Not a legacy of property or money, those are just things, but a legacy of choice, of choosing love even when it's not easy, of choosing grace even when you've been hurt, of choosing to believe that people can grow and change and learn. James is 45. He has time to become the man I always believed he could be. And maybe, when he's 50 and writes that letter that trust requires, he'll have figured out what family really means. Or maybe he won't. Either way, I'll have lived my truth. That's the thing about getting older. You realize that you can't control how your story is told by others. You can only control how you live it. And I've lived mine with as much love and integrity as I could manage. Some days better than others, but always trying. That's enough. That's more than enough. It's everything. A